For years, a lingering question has haunted the minds of the British public. Why did Prince Philip, the trusted lifelong companion of Queen Elizabeth II, choose to live in seclusion at Wood Farm on the Sandringham estate, instead of staying by the Queen's side in her final years? This royal couple had weathered countless historical storms together, from World War to family crises, and the harsh transformations of the post-Brexit era. And yet, as Britain stepped into the 21st century, the silence between them sparked a wave of sensational speculation. Was their royal marriage truly as perfect as it seemed? Or was it merely a beautifully painted facade hiding deep fractures beneath the glossy surface of media portrayals? The press once described Wood Farm as a retreat, a place where Prince Philip could live a life free from ceremony and the relentless spotlight. But with that came a flood of theories. An unofficial separation, a belated sulk, or perhaps even secret agreements never disclosed to the public. Throughout all those years, the British royal family, as always, offered no explanation, and that silence only fueled the flames of public curiosity. But everything changed. In a rare and shocking interview, Princess Anne, the steadfast, composed, and famously blunt daughter of the royal family, finally broke that silence. She did not just speak of her father as a man of resilience, but also revealed the deeper reasons behind his decision to live apart at Wood Farm, a confession both sincere and sharp, and more importantly, one that forced an entire nation to reconsider the almost mythical relationship between Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip under an entirely new light. According to Anne, her father's decision to reside at Wood Farm was not a sign of estrangement from her mother. Quite the opposite. It was a reflection of extraordinary understanding. My father needed a space of his own. My mother understood that. They were not apart because of a rift, but because their love was deep enough not to cling, she said, her determined gaze piercing through years of media fabrications. To Anne, it was not a withdrawal. It was a deliberate choice, a decision rooted in mutual respect and a shared recognition of individual needs after more than 70 years of companionship. This explanation did not just stun the media. It compelled many to reevaluate how they had previously perceived Prince Philip. He was not a cold man fleeing royal life, but a husband who understood the limits of personal freedom within a marriage steeped in ceremonial obligation. And Queen Elizabeth, the ever-composed icon of grace, was not a woman left behind, but a wife generous enough to let her partner live in accordance with his nature, even if that meant solitude. Yet, amid the praise for this modern love story, questions remain unanswered. Was this truly Philip's personal decision alone? Or were there other pressures from within the royal family? A life shackled by duty, status, and countless prying eyes. Was it truly his choice, or silent resignation? And more importantly, why now? Why did Anne decide to reveal what was once deemed unspeakable? Could this be her only way to protect the legacy and dignity of her parents? In an age where truth is so easily distorted by the viral speed of social media. Or perhaps, beneath this seemingly humanizing explanation, lies yet another royal secret waiting to be uncovered. Believe it or not, Princess Anne's words have reignited a story Britain thought it had buried. A story of compromise, respect, and a kind of love that transcends conventional standards. But is it enough to convince you? Tell us your thoughts. If you believe this is the truth, that Prince Philip chose to live at Wood Farm out of mutual understanding and agreement with Queen Elizabeth, leave a comment with the number 1. But if you suspect there are still deeper secrets hidden beneath it all, comment with a 0. We want to hear your voice. Because sometimes, the truth lies in the hands of those brave enough to ask the question. He was not born to be a symbol, nor was he raised in the warm embrace of affection. The heart of Prince Philip, The man who stood behind Queen Elizabeth II for over 7 decades was forged not in velvet and luxury, but in storms and separation. Few know that the Queen's loyal husband was once a child without a country, without a home, growing up amidst coups, the screams of war, and even the whispers behind the closed doors of psychiatric hospitals where his mother was confined. It was not just a stolen childhood. It was the beginning of a harsh destiny, one that shaped a cold, resilient, and deeply reserved character. So much so that even while living separately at Wood Farm, he still made Britain wonder whether something hidden was being kept from the public. Philip was born in 1921 in a small villa on the island of Corfu, Greece. Royal blood ran through his veins. He was a prince of Greece and Denmark, but that title existed only on paper, for when he was just 18 months old, his entire family was exiled following a military coup. Philip was smuggled out of Greece in a makeshift cot made from an orange crate, as soldiers searched for his father, Prince Andrew, who narrowly escaped execution. From that moment, Philip's life veered onto a path that no one in the Greek royal family could have imagined. Becoming a wanderer, living from one aunt's home to another across Germany, France, and then England. His father, a charming but indifferent man, soon abandoned the family. Living a drifting life in southern France with lovers and strong liquor, his mother, Princess Alice of Battenberg, after being diagnosed with schizophrenia, was committed to a sanatorium in Switzerland. Philip was left alone. From a royal child, he became a young man without nationality, without family. Letters sent out brought no replies. Dinner tables were quiet, joyless. Christmases passed with only silence as his companion. Yet it was precisely these fragments of hardship that forged the unyielding spirit of Philip. He was first sent to school in France, then Germany, then in the looming shadow of fascism. Eventually, he was moved to Gordonstoun, a strict boarding school in Scotland. There, students woke at dawn, washed their own clothes, ran for hours in the cold, and were given no room for weakness. While other aristocratic children struggled to adapt, Philip thrived. He found something familiar in the discipline, perhaps a sense of control he had never known in his childhood. Gordonstoun taught him not only how to survive, but also how to suppress emotions, how to act like a rock, a trait that would later define his role as husband to a reigning monarch. That stormy youth etched a singular personality into him. Reticent, cold, but sharp and immensely proud. Philip had no patience for sentimentality. He despised weakness and pity. To him, survival meant standing on one's own feet, even when alone amidst the grandeur yet unfamiliarity of the British royal family. When he married Elizabeth, he did not merely give up his religion, nationality, and surname. He gave up his wounded ego to become the loyal shadow of a woman who would be queen to millions, but not the kind of wife who could confide in him each night. And perhaps, for that reason, in his final years, he chose Wood Farm not out of anger or isolation, but simply to reconnect with the part of himself he had once lost. In that modest wooden house in Sandringham, there were no solemn guards, no glittering silver banquets, only the peace that a man who had known loneliness since childhood could truly appreciate. It was where he could be himself, away from the palace's prying eyes, and the place where he left behind secrets only those who truly understood him, like Princess Anne, might someday explain. It was through those storm-filled years and lack of familial shelter that Philip learned to survive like a lone warrior, and it was the iron discipline honed at Gordonstoun, a school infamous for its military-like rigor, that shaped a man who appeared cold and withdrawn, but was unbreakably tough. Yet, as he stepped into adulthood, the life of this exiled prince took an unexpected turn, becoming deeply entwined with Britain, the very nation that would ultimately define his destiny in ways no one could have foreseen. At first, Philip had little connection with the United Kingdom. Though of European royal blood, he was born in Greece, educated in France, moved to Germany, and only came to England as a last resort, to escape the political chaos engulfing the continent. But it was Britain, with its conservative values, unwavering loyalty to monarchy, and foggy stoicism, that allowed Philip to find his sense of self. He not only integrated but chose to renounce all his titles, an act rarely taken lightly by anyone of royal lineage, to officially become a British subject and receive his new title, Duke of Edinburgh. That decision was more than political. It was a firm declaration that Philip was ready to leave behind a troubled past, a displaced royal house, and the shattered memories of childhood, to build a new chapter aligned with the fate of the British royal family. The name Philip of Greece now wore the mantle of a British duke, a symbol of submission, loyalty, and a lifelong commitment to a once foreign country that had now become everything. But a haunting question still quietly echoes. Did the fractures and losses of his childhood silently shape the way Philip coped with the pressures of royal life later on? Did the psychological scars of his youth, witnessing his mother being committed to a mental asylum, his father abandoning the family to live a hedonistic life in France, and himself drifting from one dormitory and boarding school to another, make him distant from tender emotions, cold in his relationships with his own children, and perhaps even with Queen Elizabeth? The answer, perhaps, lies in the very way he lived, unyielding to the point of cruelty, principled to the point of extremity, and at times so distant that others found him unreachable. Yet it was that very severity that made him the quiet but indispensable pillar beside the Queen for more than 70 years. Not one step back, not a single complaint. He was the man who gave up his own royal position to stand behind someone else's throne, a silent yet unwavering presence. And it all began with a fateful decision, to fully bind his life to Britain. Prince Philip's life entered a dramatic new chapter when he left behind the remnants of his exiled childhood to step into a path with no return. Love for a girl born to wear a crown. Their first meeting was in 1934 at a royal wedding. Elizabeth was just 8 years old, while Philip, the young naval prince, was 13. Unaware that destiny had already written their names onto the same page of history. Nearly a decade later, in 1939, when Elizabeth was 13 and Philip 18, they met again during a visit to the Royal Naval College in Dartmouth. What seemed like a chance encounter became the spark that ignited a love that would endure for over 70 years. From innocent, affectionate letters, a quiet but enduring love began to grow, surpassing all royal conventions of the time. Many within the royal family and the British government expressed hesitation, even opposition, to Elizabeth's choice. Although of royal blood, Philip was an outsider, a prince of Greece and Denmark with no country, no fortune, and 3 sisters who had all married Germans, including a member of the Nazi Party. To Britain's conservative aristocracy, he was coarse, unfamiliar with the Windsor family's elaborate traditions. Yet Elizabeth did not waver. Her love was not merely emotion. It was a clear and unshakable choice. The future queen declared, "He is the one I love, and I shall not marry anyone else." On November 20th, 1947, Elizabeth and Philip were married at Westminster Abbey. The ceremony was broadcast live on television, a first in royal history, capturing the attention of millions of Britons struggling to rise from the ashes of World War II. They became a symbol of new hope, a radiant young royal couple in a dark time. But behind the applause and smiles, the first quiet challenges had already begun to surface. Philip, once a naval officer used to freedom and military discipline, suddenly had to learn how to stand behind a woman, not just a wife, but the future of an entire nation. He was forced to give up his career, his personal status, and even his own name. The royal family's decision to keep the name House of Windsor instead of adopting Mountbatten, Philip's surname, left him bitter enough to cry out in despair, "I am nothing but a bloody amoeba here." Although Elizabeth later compromised by giving their children the surname Mountbatten-Windsor, the initial wound of that rejection left a scar in a man used to commanding his own fate. As for Elizabeth, she too found herself in difficult positions, constantly trying to balance her role as wife and future monarch. How could she preserve the integrity of personal love while maintaining the spotless image of the royal family? How could she listen to the man she loved while also requiring him to step back so she could step forward as queen? The long nights of argument, the heavy moments in Buckingham Palace, none of it was seen by the public, but it certainly existed. A lingering question haunted those who witnessed their relationship. Did their differences in background, role, and ambition drive them apart? Or was it love, something even a throne cannot command, that kept them together? The truth is, despite being caught in moments of anger and inevitable conflict, the bond between Philip and Elizabeth endured like an unbreakable fortress. She respected him as a partner and spiritual anchor. He, though forced to live in the shadow of the title husband of the Queen, silently stood by her side for 70 years, never once leaving. When asked about his role, Philip once said, "My job is to enable the Queen to do her job." A simple sentence that encapsulates a lifetime of sacrifice, loyalty, and timeless love. They were not a perfect fairy tale couple, but precisely because they were not perfect, because they weathered storms, dared to love in a world full of restrictions and prejudice, their love story became more extraordinary than any other royal tale. And that is also why the public did not only admire Elizabeth, they learned to value Philip too, the man who stood behind the throne, yet became the irreplaceable soul of the modern British monarchy. In the dim light of the post-war years, as Britain struggled to regain its balance between tradition and modernity, between the legacy of empire and the burden of national reconstruction, a silent storm was quietly forming within the ancient stone walls of Buckingham Palace. It was not a political upheaval, nor a crisis of the throne, but a doubt, a rumor with the explosive power of a ticking time bomb. The one at the center of it was none other than Prince Philip, and the eye of the storm revolved around a single name, Galina Ulanova, the legendary Soviet ballet dancer, a woman who emerged from the mist of steel and frost, beautiful, mysterious, and belonging to a world that Britain at the time regarded as an enemy. In the smoldering context of the Cold War, rumors that the husband of Queen Elizabeth II had associated with someone like Galina Ulanova were not merely an attack on his private life. They were a political and national security warning, because a senior member of the British royal family involved with a Soviet artist could not be dismissed as just a bedroom scandal. So, how did the rumor begin? Perhaps no one could say for certain, but grainy black and white photographs, anonymous accounts from diplomatic circles, and especially the fact that Philip had taken a short trip to Europe at the same time Ulanova was performing in London. All of these became fuel for the media's imagination. And so, from international newsrooms to whispered gossip within palace corridors, the story spread. They said he was enchanted by her like a sailor mesmerized by the siren's song. They said he secretly met Ulanova backstage at a private performance, where she danced not just with her body but with her soul. Queen Elizabeth heard it all, but she never spoke a word. In the eyes of the public, she remained the unshakable symbol of the United Kingdom. Not a single tear fell in public. Not a word of complaint left the palace walls. Yet, in the shadows, It was said that she once walked alone all night through the gardens of Balmoral Castle. Alone, no guards, no sound, as if trying to rediscover the warmth of a love that once burned bright, but now remained only ashes scattered by the wind of suspicion. Philip, true to his stubborn and blunt nature, gave no explanation, nor did he deny anything. He was once described as not a man of flowery words or justifications. He scoffed when reporters asked about Ulanova. "If I were having an affair, do you think I would be stupid enough to get involved with a Soviet ballerina?" That was his curt but heavily loaded reply. Perhaps it was a denial. Perhaps it was a proud confession in disguise. Within the family, undercurrents began to swell. Prince Andrew, still very young at the time, always defended his father. He would later say in an interview many years after, "My father is the most devoted man to his family that I have ever known. He may be cold, but he never betrayed my mother." But were the words of a son enough to erase thousands of tabloid headlines, when Philip's own silence only added fuel to the fire? Many believed that if the story were true, it would not only be a betrayal of love, but also a betrayal of the nation's trust. Because Queen Elizabeth was not just a wife, she was a symbol, the head of the Church of England, the embodiment of dignity and resilience. If her heart were wounded by the one man closest to her, who else could believe in the traditional values of the monarchy? However, one truth must be spoken, whether true or false. The rumor about Ulanova cannot be viewed solely through the lens of romance. It was also a stark reflection of the loneliness in a marriage bound by ritual and duty. Philip, once a free naval officer, was now confined to endless ceremonies, to bowing before his own wife, to stepping behind her every time they appeared in public, a part of his wild spirit. The man of the sea and of adventure may have felt suffocated. Galina Ulanova, if she truly had a connection with Philip, might not have been just a lover. She may have symbolized liberation, a glimpse of a world without crowns, without protocol, without the watchful eyes of an entire nation. And that is what made the suspicion so dangerous. Not only because it struck at the heart of the Queen, but because it opened a crack in the untouchable image of the British monarchy. But then time passed. Ulanova returned to the Soviet Union and never mentioned Philip again. The prince continued his role alongside Elizabeth for many more decades. Until the day he passed away, they still appeared together, still smiled, still held hands on special occasions, and the British public, having grown accustomed to rumors, gradually let that story fade into oblivion. However, in the memory of those who lived through that era, the name Ulanova remains a fine but deep scratch in the legend of love between Philip and Elizabeth. It raises an unanswerable question. Was their love strong enough to overcome every storm? Or were they merely people bound by fate, choosing silence to preserve the crown? The truth may have been buried along with love letters never made public, locked diaries, and the quiet glances in the night of a queen who never shed tears before her people. Galina Ulanova, that mysterious ballerina, vanished into history like a ghost. But it was that very shadow that forced the public once again to confront the eternal question: how much of it was true love, and how much of it was the necessary endurance to uphold a monarchy? On a quiet morning in mid-2017, while much of the public was still engrossed in the glimmering, never-ending royal affairs at Buckingham Palace, a silent yet seismic decision was made. Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, the lifelong companion of Queen Elizabeth II for more than 70 years, unexpectedly announced his retirement at the age of 96. No more attending tedious ceremonies, no more cheerful smiles for the cameras at statue unveilings or handshakes with heads of state. Instead, he retreated to Wood Farm, a small house tucked away within the Sandringham estate, to live what he once whispered to an old friend as a life without rushed morning shaves and no longer needing to bow to anyone. To the media, It was just a short, procedural official announcement. But to those who understood the inner workings of the court and closely followed every royal movement, it was an unexpected turn. One that could even be called a silent declaration from Philip after a lifetime spent in the shadow of the throne. He did not leave the family, nor did he separate from the Queen, but he chose just enough distance to live in line with his strong, independent, and unrestrained nature. A navy man once used to the freedom of the seas, a man born a prince of Greece who had spent his entire life bowing to British protocol, had finally reclaimed something he had traded for decades: his autonomy. Princess Anne, his only daughter, quickly spoke up to calm public speculation. She emphasized that this decision was not the result of any fracture in her parents' marriage. On the contrary, it was proof of a relationship deep enough to understand each other without needing to be near each other all the time. According to Anne, Philip's retreat to Wood Farm was a previously agreed-upon arrangement between him and the Queen, a respectful agreement rather than a separation. But her words could not silence the wave of rumors beginning to stir in the European media. Some insider sources revealed that Philip had often complained about feeling suffocated by the rigid protocols at Buckingham Palace and Windsor Castle. He felt exhausted being surrounded by advisors, guards, and unnecessary but unavoidable rules. At Wood Farm, he could wake up whenever he pleased, wear whatever he liked, cycle alone to the sea, or sit for hours in the reading room undisturbed. No one reminded him to appear before the press, no echoing footsteps, no formal greetings, just him, too, and moments that were truly his own. For Queen Elizabeth, this may have been one of her quietest sacrifices. For many years, she considered Philip her unwavering support, emotionally and politically. Accepting his physical absence, even if only a few hours away, was proof that true love does not need to keep someone beside you, but instead gives them the space to be who they truly are. A love that had weathered so many storms, from wartime to endless scandals involving their children, was now tested again by voluntary separation. And as she always did, the Queen chose silence, letting her heart speak through the rare, quiet visits she made to Wood Farm, without cameras, without protocol. But the media was not so easily appeased. Numerous articles began questioning whether Philip's separate living arrangement was truly just retirement, or a way for him to escape the pressures of a family gradually spiraling out of control amidst scandals involving Prince Andrew, tensions between William and Harry, and the Queen's increasingly fragile health. Perhaps Wood Farm was not merely a holiday home, but rather a spiritual bunker, where Philip quietly observed the empire he had been devoted to for his entire life, slowly transforming day by day. And there was another element that kept this decision an ongoing topic of discussion. Was his separation a silent act of rebellion against the role he had been forced to assume for so many years? The role of the Queen's shadow. Although he was respected within the military, Philip always had to walk behind his wife, as required by royal protocol. Each public appearance saw him as the Queen's consort, never standing alone as an independent figure. In his youth, he had once grumbled that his children did not bear the Mountbatten name. In his later years, he came to accept the things he could not change. Yet a quiet dissatisfaction always simmered within. Now, at Wood Farm, he could simply be Philip, a man in his own right. No longer Philip, the ceremonious duke. Yet, within the solitude he chose, there remained a proud image. Neighbors recalled that he maintained a neat, disciplined lifestyle. He woke early in the morning, exercised, read newspapers, did crossword puzzles, and wrote handwritten letters to old friends from the military. He continued chatting with staff, drove himself to the sea when the weather was calm, and, above all, never allowed anyone to serve him excessively. That simple life was not just a reward of old age, but the final declaration of a man who had once been the firmest, most spirited and uncompromising figure in the royal family. And then, when he passed away in 2021, at the very place he had chosen to retreat to, there were no more doubts. Wood Farm was not an escape, but a resting point in an extraordinary journey, a final place where he could live true to himself, shed all burdens, and step away from the spotlight he had once stood in to serve the nation, but where he had also left too much of himself behind. The final question remains unanswered. Was that decision to live separately a silent declaration of personal freedom, or a sign that even the greatest love needs space to breathe? Or, more accurately, was it the most beautiful proof of a mature love? One that does not require closeness every day, but still knows that, no matter the distance, the heart always turns toward a single place. A place Philip called home. In the eerie stillness of the pandemic in 2020, when the entire world was drowning in anxiety and isolation, something unusual happened behind the ancient stone walls of Windsor Castle. While the United Kingdom was under lockdown and invisible fear cloaked every corner of daily life, Prince Philip and Queen Elizabeth II, two symbolic figures of a century-spanning monarchy, chose to reunite. Gone were the grand rituals, the hundreds of receptions, the binding national duties. All that remained were two aged, weathered individuals, facing each other in a vast, hauntingly silent castle. After 3 years of living separately at Wood Farm in the peaceful lands of Sandringham, where he sought simplicity and his final breath of freedom, Philip returned to Windsor to live with Elizabeth during a time of global upheaval. This prompted many within the royal family and media to ask, was this a reaffirmation of a love long buried under silence? Or was it simply practical, as two elderly people could no longer manage on their own during a deadly pandemic? Whatever the reason, the time spent at Windsor left behind unforgettable moments for all members of the royal family. As Princess Anne shared in a private interview after her father's funeral, she said, "It was the first time in many years that I saw my mother and father talking without being interrupted by protocol or aides. It was as if they had rediscovered a rhythm of their own, something that time and duty had swept away." Prince Charles, who had a complex relationship with his father, also admitted that the period helped him understand more clearly the roots of his own identity. He recounted that during one special evening, when the whole family joined a Zoom call for Philip's birthday, he saw the gentle look his father gave his mother, and for the first time in many years, he felt something that could only be described as peace. But perhaps the one who understood most deeply what was happening was Elizabeth herself. For a woman who had witnessed the ups and downs of more than 7 decades of reign, the days living with Philip in the twilight of life were not merely a matter of convenience during a pandemic. It was destiny's final gift, a chance for them to relive those simple years before the throne pulled them into the endless vortex of duty and distance. Then, in April 2021, the world seemed to fall silent when Buckingham Palace announced the heartbreaking news. Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, had passed away at the age of 99, just 2 months shy of his 100th birthday. He died in his sleep, at Windsor Castle, where he and Elizabeth had spent their final days together. His death was not unexpected. Everyone knew the day would come, but the emotions it left behind were far from gentle. It was not only a loss for the royal family, but the final punctuation mark to a love story that had run parallel to the modern history of Britain. His funeral, limited by pandemic restrictions, was held in a modest fashion, attended by only 30 people. The image of the Queen sitting alone on a cold bench in St. George's Chapel became a haunting symbol of widowhood's loneliness, regardless of title or power. She did not shed tears in public, but her gaze upon the royal standard-draped coffin said it all. a profound loss that no words could ever express. Philip's legacy was not confined to the 73 years of marriage he devoted to Elizabeth. It was also the image of a steel-willed man, always standing behind but never fading, who gave up a promising naval career to become the unwavering support for a young queen. Though he was sometimes criticized for inappropriate remarks or his stern demeanor, Philip remained the embodiment of a loyal and devoted husband in a world where such values were becoming increasingly rare. Their marriage, in the end, was a symbol of timeless steadfastness. From the days when Elizabeth was still a young princess to when she became the queen of over a quarter of the world, Philip was always by her side, not as a shadow, but as a silent pillar. They endured countless trials, from scandals involving their children, rumors of infidelity, geographic distance, to public pressure. Yet, they continued to walk hand in hand until the very end. The final lingering question in the public's mind was the reunion at Windsor in their final days, a carefully orchestrated act of fate, allowing Elizabeth and Philip to conclude their long journey with a complete chapter. Or was it simply the inevitable consequence of the pandemic, a time when people were forced to retreat within the boundaries of their closest relationships? Whatever it may have been, for many, it was a fitting ending, a long life, a lasting love, and a peaceful death beside the only life partner he had ever known, ever trusted, and ever loved. Elizabeth once said, "Philip is my strength, the one I lean on." Now that he is gone, she no longer has that support, but the rest of Britain and the world will always remember him as the man who chose to love, chose to stand behind, and chose to remain loyal until the end. And perhaps, in that fleeting moment when the world quieted due to a pandemic, that enduring love spoke loudest, not with romantic words or grand gestures, but with a deep, silent strength, noble and resolute, just like Philip himself. A legacy that needs no monuments, no medals, because the memories of her, of their children, and of the nation are already an eternal reward. In the new light that Princess Anne courageously illuminated, the entire love story spanning more than 70 years between Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip was suddenly seen through an entirely different lens. The years of living apart, once perceived as a fracture, were now revealed as a practical and understanding choice. A silent agreement full of respect between two people who had dedicated their entire lives to duty and honor, not because their love had faded, but because they both understood that if they could not be near each other at all times, they could at least give one another a space of their own, without resentment, without force, simply with absolute trust. And it was in that very silence that true love remained intact. Therefore, the death of Prince Philip in April 2021 was no longer a cold end to a royal marriage. On the contrary, it became a moving pause, the conclusion of a magnificent life chapter written in steadfastness, endurance, and profound respect between two individuals who had always been the pillars of the United Kingdom through an era of immense upheaval. Philip did not merely pass away in peace. He left this world with his heart still turned toward the woman he had loved since his days as a young naval officer, and had never stopped loving. Despite all the storms of history and family, the essence of a marriage does not lie in being together every single day, but in the fact that, after distance and time apart, they still look at each other with the same gaze as in the beginning. With Princess Anne's words, all suspicions, all whispers, all doubts about Philip's coldness or Elizabeth's loneliness in her final years were swept away. There was no tragedy, no abandonment, only an aged, matured love that had weathered the storm and stood strong like an ancient tree, its exterior perhaps rough, but its roots deeply anchored in the soil of devotion. If there is a message to be drawn from the final chapter of that love, It is this: no love exists without challenges, but no challenge can bring down true love. If both people choose to stand together, even if, at times, only in silence. The relationship between Philip and Elizabeth was far from perfect. It had faced crises, rumors, coldness, and even cruel personal sacrifices. But in the end, they still held hands in the corridors of Windsor Castle during the pandemic, quietly watching the chaos of the world outside, and cherishing every last moment they had together. And perhaps it was the pandemic, a harsh event that seemed to push people apart, that became their final opportunity to reaffirm one thing: we do not need to live forever to love completely. We only need the right moment, enough sincerity, and a heart that refuses to let go. In the quiet space of Windsor Castle, there were no media lights, no dazzling royal ceremonies, only two elderly people sharing breakfast, telling old stories, laughing together, and closing their eyes in peace. That was the true legacy. Not the throne, not power, but love. The only thing that remains when all titles have faded into the past. They lived, loved, and departed like quiet companions. Unpretentious, unceremonious, yet it was that very simplicity that became an eternal symbol of loyalty and love, of courage in choosing to walk together through both darkness and light. Today, when people look back on the lives of Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip, they no longer speak primarily of war, politics, or royal scandals. They remember them as an old married couple who proved that, despite all the storms of history, love, if deep enough, can surpass even time and death. And now, it is your turn, the one reading these words, to reflect and feel. What do you think of this 73-year-long marriage? Do you see it as a modern-day fairy tale, or simply a testament to the sacrifices made between two grown individuals within the boundaries of responsibility? Leave your comment below. Type 1 if you admire the perseverance, faithfulness, and dedication they showed, or 0 if you believe there are still untold stories, secrets that only history will gradually reveal. Because, like everything in the royal family, there are always things that quietly drift in the shadows. Do not forget to hit the like button, share this video, and subscribe to our channel so we can continue bringing you untold stories from behind the closed doors of the British monarchy. Behind those doors, there is not just a throne and duty. There is also love, tears, inner conflict, and relationships as complex as any classic tragedy by Shakespeare. And finally, if anything lingers after all is said and done, perhaps it is this, quote, "Despite distance and challenge, Philip and Elizabeth proved that true love can surpass all limits, leaving behind an everlasting legacy. A legacy not only inscribed in the history books, but in the very hearts of those who have ever believed in a love that is enduring, unglamorous, but infinitely great." The morning of March 12th, 2026, 10:15 a.m., the long corridor inside Buckingham Palace suddenly fell into a silence so deep that every footstep echoed sharply against the marble floor. Royal aides froze in place. Security staff exchanged uneasy glances, and in the center of that charged stillness, Prince William stepped forward and stopped in front of Queen Camila. His gaze was cold, his voice low and resolute. "The treasury is not your private dowry." A single sentence, yet it struck like a hammer against the very foundation of an entire reign. Less than 60 seconds later, a series of decisions moved rapidly through the palace internal system. 12 members within Camila family network were abruptly cut off from all financial support linked to royal funds. No prior warning, no negotiation, no way out. Numbers began circulating among royal observers. £14,850,200. A staggering sum believed to have flowed through funds and family connections for years, and that was only the tip of the iceberg. Behind the scenes, even more shocking details began to surface. A confession reportedly coming from Andrew Parker Bowles, a silver USB stored inside a secure vault at a private bank in Zurich. Financial data that, if revealed, could shake the entire power structure of the House of Windsor. For the public, this was no longer a typical family dispute. Many commentators described it as the most ruthless financial purge in modern royal history, an internal conflict capable of destabilizing the monarchy itself. So the biggest question now is this: is Prince William protecting taxpayer money, or has he gone too far in a power struggle inside the palace? Leave your comment now. Number 1, if you support William. Number 2, if you believe Camilla is being treated unfairly. I will read and respond to all of them. But to understand why everything exploded with such force, we need to go back in time, back to the very first seeds of this conflict. On April 15th, 2025, an operation never officially announced quietly began inside Buckingham Palace. There was no press release, no public schedule, and certainly no media presence. Yet internally, one name circulated with unmistakable caution: Operation Clean Slate. A large-scale financial audit reportedly approved by Prince William himself, with a single objective: to clean up the entire flow of money operating behind the royal curtain. At first, many believed this was merely a routine review, a symbolic move designed to reinforce the image of transparency in a new era. But within weeks, the atmosphere began to shift. Independent auditors were brought in with unprecedented access. Accounts long overlooked were suddenly reopened. Auxiliary funds, undisclosed expenditures, and especially transactions linked to external companies were examined down to the smallest detail. Then the first number appeared: £14,850,200, a massive sum discovered to have been withdrawn from royal-related funds through a network of 8 shell companies based in tax havens. The company names sounded harmless: Strategic Consulting, Image Communications, Reputation Management. But when records were compared, a troubling pattern began to emerge. Among them, one company drew particular attention: registered as an image consulting firm. It was on paper responsible for improving the public image of high-profile individuals. Yet within 36 months, more than £4,322,180 had been transferred into its account. And what auditors could not ignore was its ownership structure. Internal documents indicated direct links between the company and individuals close to Queen Camilla family. This was no longer vague suspicion. It was an organized chain of transactions spanning years, with clear signs of money being redirected through complex legal layers. When the preliminary report was placed on the table, everyone in the room understood they were facing an issue that could not be resolved through silence. According to internal sources, the entire file was then delivered directly to Prince William. No intermediaries, no communications office, and what followed became one of the most talked-about moments behind palace doors. In a private room, beneath a portrait of Princess Diana, William sat alone with a document stacked hundreds of pages thick. No one was allowed to disturb him. No aides, no advisors, only him, the numbers, and the cold lines of data. 4 hours passed in absolute silence. Those waiting outside could only speculate about what was unfolding behind the closed door. Some said he barely moved. Others recalled that he read each page slowly, as if trying to piece together a picture that had been torn apart for years. For William, this was not merely a financial issue. It touched something deeper: trust, legacy, and how the monarchy is seen in the eyes of the public. When he finally stepped out of that room, no statement was made. But according to those who witnessed it, his expression had completely changed. No longer the caution of an heir. It was the cold resolve of a man who had made his decision. From that moment, Operation Clean Slate was no longer an audit. It became a campaign. Financial flows were frozen. Connections were re-examined. Names once considered untouchable began appearing on internal investigation lists. And what made the entire situation more dangerous than ever was the fact that these numbers did not stand alone. They were only the visible surface of a far more complex structure, where finance, power, and personal relationships were intertwined in ways that very few could fully see. Because the deeper the auditors went, the more they realized that this network was not simply a collection of suspicious transactions. It showed signs of being systematically constructed, with the clear objective of protecting and concealing financial flows over a long period of time. Then, just when everything already seemed shocking enough, a new detail began to emerge from the files. Not a number, not an account, but a voice, a confession recorded in the past. One that could completely change how everything was being understood. The numbers were only the surface. The real secret lay in a voice from the past. On April 15, 2025, at the very moment Operation Clean Slate had just been activated, a recording lasting 6 minutes and 42 seconds was created in a sealed room, with no recording devices except a single unit placed at the center of the table. The voice in that recording did not belong to a stranger. It was Andrew Parker Bowles, a name deeply tied to the complex layers of royal history, and a man who understood better than anyone the quiet connections behind the scenes. But what made this recording extraordinary was not the identity of the speaker, but the content he chose to leave behind. For the entire 6 minutes and 42 seconds, Andrew did not hesitate. He did not evade. He described what he called a strategic infiltration lasting 3 decades. According to him, this was not a series of isolated transactions or financial mistakes. It was a structure built deliberately, step by step, embedding itself into the royal financial system through layers of legal cover. Small expenses that appeared harmless gradually became stable financial streams, maintained over many years without drawing attention. He mentioned a concept that would make anyone pause: ghost stipends, unofficial allowances, not fully recorded in public reports, yet existing as recurring payments. According to Andrew, this was one of the most effective tools for maintaining financial flows without leaving clear traces. These funds were dispersed across multiple channels and accounts, eventually converging at points that very few could trace. Then he spoke about what he called the black files, not ordinary documents, but collections of financial data, contracts, and sensitive information stored outside the official system. 2 locations were mentioned clearly: the Cayman Islands and Zurich. According to Andrew, this was where the most critical data was kept, not for daily use, but as protection for the structure when necessary, a form of power insurance, in case anything went off course. The most shocking element of the entire recording was not the method, but the scale. Andrew asserted that the figure of more than £14 million that had been discovered was only the tip of the iceberg, a small fraction of a much larger system that had operated silently for many years. If what he said was accurate, then this was no longer a single financial case. It was a systematically constructed network, with a depth that even those inside it could hardly fully grasp. However, what made the situation even more tense was the timing of when the recording was delivered. Although it had been recorded in April 2025, it was not until March 9, 2026 that it was placed into the hands of Prince William. It did not pass through any official channel. There was no clear trace of any intermediary, only a package of data delivered with content powerful enough to shift the entire landscape. According to close sources, William listened to the recording for the first time at Adelaide Cottage, not in a meeting room, not in front of advisors, but in a private space where he could confront what was being revealed directly. And notably, he did not listen just once. He replayed it multiple times, as if verifying every detail, every word. Those close to William later recalled that his reaction was not an immediate outburst. There was no public anger, no rushed statement. Instead, there was a prolonged silence, a pause long enough for everything to settle, yet also long enough for a major decision to take shape. For William, this recording did not merely provide information. It changed how he viewed the entire system he was preparing to inherit. If what Andrew said was true, then this was no longer about image management or handling media crises. It was a question about the integrity of the monarchy itself. And that was the moment many believe a transformation occurred. From a cautious air, William began to be seen as someone ready to act, someone not only protecting reputation, but willing to confront structures that had existed for years. Some sources even described his resolve with a single word: crusade, a campaign that was personal in nature, yet carried consequences far beyond the personal. When the recording ended, the room at Adelaide Cottage fell into silence. There was no one there to witness that moment except William himself. But what followed spoke for everything. Audit orders were intensified. Accounts were flagged. Connections were monitored more closely than ever before. And most importantly, time was no longer on anyone's side, because once such evidence was in hand, waiting was no longer an option. Every passing minute carried the risk that information could be leaked, concealed, or erased. For William, the decision appeared to have been made very early. No delay, no compromise, no half measures. And that is why, only a few days after receiving the recording, a series of decisive actions began to unfold behind palace doors. No prior announcement, no warning, only sudden changes, executed with precise calculation down to every detail. Because with this evidence in his hands, William no longer had any reason to wait. He was ready to cut off the lifeline of an entire network. After the recording was replayed again and again in the stillness of Adelaide Cottage, everything moved into a completely different phase. It was no longer about gathering information, no longer about analysis. This was when action began. And at the center of that entire strategy was an internal mechanism that very few had ever heard of. Oxygen cut. A short term, but one with a clear meaning. To sever the financial lifeline of the entire network through a chain of coordinated actions, executed so quickly and precisely that no opportunity for response remained. According to legal sources, Prince William relied on a rarely used clause within the Sovereign Grant Act. This provision allowed the future head of the monarchy to redefine certain financial behaviors as a security threat, not national security in the traditional sense, but the security of the royal family structure itself, especially when such actions could directly affect the line of succession. In William interpretation, the redirection of financial flows through opaque structures was not merely a financial violation, it was a risk, a threat capable of undermining public trust, and in doing so, endangering the future of his children. This definition opened a legal pathway broad enough for him to implement a series of unprecedented measures. The first phase was called identification, not a single investigation, but a process of mapping the entire network of relationships. Every name was placed on the list, not only those directly receiving money, but also individuals indirectly connected through companies, funds, and intermediary accounts. A financial family tree was constructed, detailed enough to trace each flow of money through every layer before reaching its final destination. And at the center of that network were links surrounding the family of Queen Camila. Once the map was complete, the second phase was activated. Transparency threshold? A transparency limit was set at £500. Any transaction exceeding that amount had to be fully explained, with complete supporting documentation. It sounded simple, but in practice it was an extremely effective tightening mechanism, because it completely dismantled the system of dispersing funds through small amounts. Payments that had once been split to avoid attention were now forced into the open. Within days, the system began to react. Waves of explanation requests were sent out. Accounts were flagged. Transactions that had once moved quietly were now dragged into the light. And most critically, the response time was reduced to a point where maneuvering became almost impossible. The third phase came faster than anyone expected. Cut. This was where Oxygen Cut revealed its true nature. No more warnings. No more room for negotiation. A series of credit cards linked to suspected accounts suddenly stopped functioning. Limits were frozen. Transfers were blocked immediately. Those involved only realized what was happening when they could no longer carry out even the most basic transactions. A payment declined. A bill left unpaid. A bank account that no longer responded. Within hours, a network that had operated smoothly for years fell into complete paralysis. But if cut was the direct strike, the final phase was the true finishing blow. Repossession. A series of legal notices were issued with a clear deadline. 21 days. 3 high-value properties connected to the network were ordered to be surrendered. No extensions. No exceptions. At the same time, insurance contracts were frozen. Loans were called in. The final layers of financial protection were systematically removed. And this created an irreversible chain reaction. When assets were no longer protected, their value dropped sharply. When value dropped, borrowing capacity disappeared. And without access to credit, the entire financial structure began collapsing from within. The most shocking figure was not the amount of money frozen, but the speed of the collapse. In an extremely short period of time, the entire network connected to the Parker Bowles family fell into a state of insolvency. Insolvent. A single word, yet enough to describe the downfall of a system that had existed for many years. For outside observers, this was a ruthless move, a financial purge carried out with near-perfect precision. But for William, according to close sources, it was an unavoidable step. Once a system had been infiltrated, it could not be cleaned in fragments. It had to be done completely. What made this entire campaign remarkable was not only the outcome, but the way it was executed. There were no significant leaks throughout the process. No external interference. Everything unfolded within a tightly controlled circle, with the number of people aware of the operation kept to an absolute minimum. And as the effects began to spread, those involved gradually realized the true scale of what was happening. This was no longer an internal adjustment. It was a full-scale restructuring, aimed not only at addressing violations, but at redefining the entire operating framework of the royal financial system. But in every conflict, there is always a response from the other side, and this time was no exception. As funds were cut, as assets were reclaimed, as layers of protection disappeared one by one, the silence did not last long, because on the other side of this purge, Queen Camila was not someone who would accept defeat easily. But when the money was cut off, Camila did not remain silent. She struck back. According to multiple close sources, the first direct confrontation between Queen Camila and Prince William took place in a private room inside Buckingham Palace. No press, no advisors, only those directly involved. But what happened inside that room quickly became a story whispered throughout the palace corridors. Camila entered with anger she could not conceal. Financial reports, freezing orders, repossession notices had pushed her into a position she had never faced before. And then, in a moment many described as a loss of control, she hurled a porcelain cup to the floor. The sound of it shattering echoed like a signal that every boundary had been broken. Her voice trembled with anger as she faced William. "You are killing your father for the sake of a ghost." The sentence was not only directed at his present actions, it also pulled in a past that had never truly been resolved. The word ghost needed no explanation. It pointed to Princess Diana, a name that has always lingered like a shadow over every relationship within this family. In that moment, the room fell into silence. Those present understood that this was no longer a debate about finances. This was a collision between two completely different views of the past and of responsibility. William did not respond immediately. According to witnesses, he stood still for several seconds, his eyes fixed on Camilla. Then he replied, his voice low but firm, "I will not let my mother's legacy pay for your family silence." That response was more than a rebuttal. It was a declaration, a clear line drawn between two generations, two approaches, and two systems of values. For William, this was not only about addressing financial misconduct, it was how he chose to protect the memory of his mother, and how he intended to redefine the future of the monarchy. The confrontation ended without compromise. No handshake. No sign that either side would find common ground anytime soon. But its consequences spread almost immediately. At Highgrove House, King Charles III was said to have followed the entire development with a clear sense of helplessness. He did not directly take part in the confrontation, yet its impact on him was undeniable. On one side was the wife, who had stood beside him through years of turmoil. On the other was the son, who would inherit everything he would leave behind. Those close to Charles said he fell into a state of unprecedented difficulty. Any public support could be interpreted as taking sides, and in a conflict so deeply personal, choosing one side meant wounding the other. Meanwhile, outside the palace, public reaction began to form at remarkable speed. Informal polls showed a significant rise in support for William, 68%, a figure reflecting a belief that he was acting to protect transparency and the legitimacy of the monarchy. In contrast, support for Camilla dropped to a historic low, 15%, a gap that was not just numerical, but a sign of a major shift in how the public viewed her role. What made the situation more complex was that these numbers did not remain on paper. They began to influence how other members of the family responded. Some chose silence. Some kept their distance. Others began to reconsider their position within a power structure that was rapidly changing. For many observers, this marked a turning point, not because of the scale of the conflict, but because of how it exposed fractures that had long existed, tensions between tradition and modernity, between personal loyalty and public duty, and most importantly, between the past and the future of the monarchy. In this context, every action and every statement carried greater weight than ever before. There was no longer room for half measures, no space for temporary solutions. And as all eyes remained fixed on Buckingham Palace, a new development began to take shape elsewhere, a place less visible, yet potentially capable of altering the entire balance. Because while the confrontation between William and Camilla dominated attention, another shadow was quietly approaching, another figure, another center of power, preparing to enter the game. Then, from Clarence House, an unexpected move began to emerge. On March 13, 2026, while the aftermath of the internal confrontation still lingered through the corridors of power, another development unfolded quietly, thousands of kilometers away. There were no camera flashes, no official announcement, only a courier, appearing and disappearing in absolute silence. The destination was a private bank deep within Zurich, known for some of the highest levels of secure storage in the world. According to leaked sources, the item delivered was not a thick file or a suitcase of documents. It was small enough to fit in the palm of a hand, a silver USB, a silver drive. Yet its modest size concealed content capable of shaking not only the monarchy, but the international financial system. The device was said to contain multiple layers of data. First, unpublished video recordings capturing internal discussions and informal agreements related to financial flows that had been hidden for years. These recordings, if made public, could trigger a media earthquake, because they did not merely show numbers. They captured people, voices, and decisions made behind closed doors. But that was only the beginning. The most critical component lay in a set of decryption keys stored within the device. These keys were designed to unlock what had earlier been referred to as the black files, a distributed data system stored across financial havens and protected by multiple layers of encryption. Once activated, the entire structure of information would become transparent. Accounts, transactions, and connections between individuals and organizations would be exposed without any remaining shield. What made the silver drive truly dangerous was not only its content, but the mechanism attached to it. A dead man's switch, a system pre-programmed to operate independently of any individual, will once activated. According to technology experts, it functioned on a simple yet highly effective principle. If a specific condition was not met within a defined period of time, the data would automatically be distributed to a network of servers and media partners across the globe. In the current context, that condition was believed to be directly linked to the actions of Prince William. If he continued the oxygen cut campaign without adjustment or pause, the system would interpret it as a trigger. And once the distribution process began, there would be almost no way to stop it. Sources describe this scenario with a single phrase: digital Armageddon. A digital catastrophe in which financial secrets kept hidden for years could be exposed within hours, not limited to a single family or organization, but potentially involving individuals and financial systems across multiple countries. What was notable was the location of the device. It was not in the hands of any member of the royal family. It was locked within a storage facility in Zurich, protected by independent security protocols. This meant that no one could simply access and disable it. Every move would have to be calculated carefully, because any mistake could trigger the release mechanism. Meanwhile, information about the existence of the silver drive began to circulate within internal circles, not loudly, but enough to create a wave of concern. Because, for the first time, this conflict was no longer confined to finance or family power. It had expanded into a new domain: technology, data, and control of information. For William, this was an unprecedented situation. On one side was the objective of cleansing the system and protecting the legitimacy of the monarchy. On the other was the risk of triggering a chain of events with uncontrollable consequences. Every step from this point forward carried the highest level of risk. And the central question began to emerge: would he continue forward despite the danger, or choose another path to avoid a global crisis? Would William step back, or was the monarchy now standing at a crossroads where every choice came with an immeasurable cost? At this moment, as all the pieces began to surface, royal observers started to outline a scenario tree. 3 possible futures, each carrying consequences significant enough to reshape the history of the House of Windsor. It was no longer a question of who was right or wrong. It was a question of what would happen next. The first scenario, and also the worst case, is called disaster. If the dead man switch is triggered, if the silver drive in Zurich truly releases its data globally, the consequences will not stop at a financial scandal. It could lead to a collapse of trust in the entire monarchy. Offshore accounts exposed, overlapping financial relationships laid bare. And at that point, the monarchy would face not only a media crisis, but a crisis of survival. The second scenario is called cleansing. In this case, Prince William does not step back. He continues his campaign to the end, but with precise risk control. The Parker Bowles network is completely dismantled. Financial flows are cut off, and a new financial structure is established, more transparent and more disciplined. In the eyes of many, this is the path where William becomes a shadow sovereign, a man not yet crowned, but already holding real control over how the monarchy operates. The final scenario is disillusionment, a less dramatic path. but no less dangerous. In this case, William chooses to step back to avoid a major crisis. The campaign slows down, measures are relaxed, and over time, the old system gradually returns. There is no dramatic collapse, but there is also no real change. A slow decay unfolds quietly, eroding the credibility of the monarchy from within. What is notable is that most current analysis leans toward the second scenario, cleansing. What has unfolded so far suggests a clear trajectory, decisive, calculated, and not easily reversed. If that is true, then we are not simply witnessing a crisis. We are witnessing a restructuring of power, a moment in which the future of an entire dynasty is being rewritten, step by step, right before our eyes. After everything that has happened, one thing is almost impossible to deny. Prince William has won the battle over money. Financial flows have been tightened. The network linked to the family of Queen Camila has been nearly neutralized within a short time. Figures once hidden have now been brought into the light, and for the first time in many years, the financial structure of the House of Windsor stands before a real opportunity for reconstruction. But if you think the story ends there, then everything may only be beginning. Because victory over money does not mean victory over honor, and on the other side of the board, the silver drive still rests silently in storage in Zurich. A reminder that nothing is truly over. It is not just a data storage device. It is leverage, a piece that can change the entire situation in a single moment. If activated, it could turn what appears to be a victory into a full-scale crisis. But if it is only a psychological move, a carefully calculated bluff, then it reveals that the level of tension and complexity in this conflict has gone far beyond all initial expectations. And that is exactly what makes this story so compelling. There are no clear answers, no absolute line between right and wrong, only choices, and the consequences that come with each of them. So what about you? How do you see the silver drive? A real threat, or just a tool of pressure in this power struggle? Leave your comment below. Type clean slate if you support William in clearing the entire system. If you want to continue following the latest developments, do not forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because this story is still unfolding, and each passing day may bring a new turning point, because the clock is still counting down. The truth is moving closer to the crown, and when it arrives, there will be no turning back. See you in the next update. In recent months, the British royal family has been engulfed in a storm of tension and uncertainty. Behind the gilded gates of Buckingham Palace, fractures within the monarchy have become more visible than ever. King Charles, whose health has shown signs of decline, appears increasingly frail with each public appearance. His struggle has sparked concerns not only about his ability to fulfill royal duties, but also about the looming question of succession. Meanwhile, Queen Camilla has stepped forward with growing authority, consolidating her influence in ways that have left the public divided. To some, she is simply filling a void left by the king's weakening condition. To others, her presence feels like a quiet power grab, reigniting memories of old scandals and resentments that never fully healed. Amid this fragile balance of power, Prince William faces the mounting responsibility of carrying the monarchy's future, while Prince Harry remains estranged across the Atlantic. Each move, each statement, adds fuel to an already volatile atmosphere. The once carefully managed image of unity now appears riddled with cracks. And just when the royal family could least afford more turmoil, today's announcement has shaken the nation. It is an announcement described as both tragic and monumental, one that will undoubtedly reshape how the monarchy is seen at home and abroad. But what does this mean for the stability of the crown? How will the public react to yet another blow to the royal family's fragile standing? And, most importantly, does this mark the beginning of an irreversible shift in royal power? What are your thoughts? Do you believe Camilla's influence is now greater than ever? Or is this the moment for William to step firmly into the spotlight? London awoke to its usual rhythm. Tourists at Buckingham Palace, guards in perfect stillness, and the palace gates shining under morning light, projecting timeless stability. Yet behind the grandeur, unease brewed. By mid-morning, the mood shifted. Journalists stirred, cameras realigned, and the royal press secretary appeared, his tense posture betraying the gravity of the moment. When he spoke, his steady voice masked a tremor. The king's health was far more serious than the palace had admitted. In an instant, the image of control fractured, and the world realized the monarchy's carefully guarded facade was beginning to unravel. In a single moment, months of speculation hardened into reality. Rumors that had once lingered at the edges about fatigue, about meetings abruptly cancelled, about secret visits to medical specialists, were no longer whispers. They had now been laid bare in black and white. The press secretary may have tried to sound composed, but the truth he carried shattered the illusion of control. Something inside the monarchy, something vital, was unraveling. The cameras quickly swung to the royal family members present. Each face told its own story, unspoken yet unmistakable. Prince William stood rigid, his jaw tight, his eyes reflecting both suppressed anger and unwavering determination. He was clearly stepping into a role larger than himself, the weight of the crown already pressing onto his shoulders. Beside him, Catherine, always the picture of grace, looked calm at first glance, yet for those who studied her closely, the worry was there, etched into the slight tightening of her lips, and the careful way she held her posture. She was steady, but not untouched. And then there was King Charles. The sight of him startled many. He appeared distant, fragile, and alarmingly ghost-like, as though age and responsibility had drained him. Not only physically, but spiritually, he did not look like the man prepared to lead a nation. He looked like one who was quietly fading, battling both time and fate. His presence, frail as it was, cast a long shadow over the moment, a reminder of human vulnerability within royal grandeur. But perhaps the most shocking part of that morning was not who was there, but who was missing. Queen Camilla's absence did not go unnoticed. In fact, it quickly became the loudest silence of the day. Questions erupted immediately. Was she unwell? Had she been deliberately kept away from the cameras? Or was there something deeper and far more troubling hidden beneath her absence? For centuries, the monarchy had lived by the power of symbols. Appearances mattered more than words, and silence was often the most powerful message of all. And yet, in this instance, the silence surrounding Queen Camilla screamed louder than any official announcement. It left the public restless, speculating, and hungry for answers. News outlets scrambled to interpret the situation, each offering their own theories. Some suggested she was protecting her health. Others believed she was shielding herself from the emotional storm. More daring voices hinted at tensions inside the palace, conflicts that had been carefully hidden until now. Whatever the truth, one fact was undeniable. Her absence had magnified the sense of crisis. The image of the royal family, once so carefully curated, was cracking before the world's eyes. Behind the polished gates and the time-worn traditions, the monarchy was confronting something it had always feared: uncertainty. And uncertainty, when draped in royal robes, is not just personal, but national. On that morning, what began as a seemingly normal day in London turned into a chapter of history still unfolding. The crowd outside the palace no longer saw only iron gates and ceremonial guards. They now stared at the uneasy silence of a dynasty standing at a crossroads where every look, every absence, and every whispered word carried the weight of destiny. Has Charles's health deteriorated so much? Since when has he been battling with this health condition? Let's delve into the details of King Charles's health condition. King Charles's deteriorating health. King Charles III is reportedly facing one of the most difficult periods of his life, with growing concerns about his health and legacy. While Buckingham Palace maintains silence, insiders suggest the monarch is battling both frailty and the weight of his reign. What began as a routine procedure for an enlarged prostate in early 2024 revealed a more serious diagnosis: cancer. Since then, his condition has reportedly worsened, raising questions about his strength to continue. Behind palace walls, the king is said to be confronting illness with courage, even as the public remains shielded from the full truth. At Chaptezech. Charles is no stranger to the demands of duty or the physical toll of a long and active life. But those close to him describe a man who now relies on a walking stick to manage even the simplest of movements. Recently, photographs taken at Sandringham, his 20,000-acre country estate in Norfolk, revealed him leaning heavily on a wooden cane as he strolled through the manicured pathways of the topiary garden. On the surface, the images released through Sandringham's official Instagram page seemed reassuring. Charles was smiling, appearing cheerful, and surrounded by the serene beauty of the estate. But those who know him best insist that the public sees only one side of the story. According to palace insiders, the king is putting on a brave face, masking his pain with an almost stubborn display of optimism. He knows the end is coming. One source confided, describing how the once vigorous monarch now shuffles slowly. A shadow of the man he once was, the walking stick, symbolic of his growing frailty, has become both a physical aid and a quiet reminder of his mortality. Reports also suggest that the king has turned to alcohol, particularly whiskey, in an attempt to dull the relentless discomfort and the despair that accompanies it. He is hitting the bottle, another insider once said, adding that the combination of declining health and emotional strain has weighed heavily on him. This, they lamented, is not the end that Charles or anyone close to him would have envisioned. A proud man weakened not only by illness but by the sorrow of knowing time is slipping away. Adding to this emotional burden is the unresolved tension with his younger son, Prince Harry. Their relationship, strained for years, has remained a source of pain for Charles throughout his reign. Many observers believe that this fractured bond has only deepened the king's inner turmoil, leaving him longing for reconciliation while also facing the stark reality that opportunities to mend the rift may be running out. Despite these struggles, Charles continues to carry out his duties as best as he can. His appearances, though fewer, are carefully managed to project stability and reassurance to the public and the Commonwealth at large. Those who have seen him in recent months say he draws on reserves of determination to fulfill his role, even as his body betrays him. His composure in public, contrasted with reports of private suffering, paints the picture of a monarch embodying stoicism in the face of adversity. What emerges from these accounts is not simply the story of a man battling illness, but of a king wrestling with the dual weight of personal pain and public responsibility. For a monarch who spent the greater part of his life waiting to ascend the throne, the cruel irony of being struck with illness so early into his reign is not lost on anyone. In the eyes of the world, King Charles III is still the sovereign, still the figurehead of an institution centuries old. But behind palace walls, according to those close to him, he is also a man confronting fragility, regret, and the inevitability of life's end. Whether history remembers this as a sad end or as the brave final chapter of a long and complex life will depend on how the coming months unfold. Apart from the king's frail health, was there another announcement that hit royal fans so hard? Let's find out. The return of Diana's shadow. As Britain struggled to come to terms with the unsettling reports of King Charles's declining health, the palace dropped another announcement, one that landed like a thunderclap across the nation. This time, it wasn't about the king. but about his son and heir, Prince William, alongside his wife. Princess Catherine revealed what they called the Diana Initiative. On the surface, the announcement sounded straightforward, a reform-minded project designed to modernize and expand the monarchy's charitable work. It was presented as the next step in bringing the royal family into closer alignment with the values and struggles of modern Britain. Yet, it was the choice of name that transformed this initiative into something far bigger than just another royal program. By invoking the name of his late mother, William was not only launching a new effort, he was reviving a memory the monarchy had spent nearly 3 decades trying to control, to soften, to bury beneath layers of official narrative. The mere mention of Diana's name cracked open old doors and reignited emotions that had never truly faded. Princess Diana, who tragically lost her life in a Paris car crash in 1997, remained one of the most influential figures of the modern age. Her impact was not measured only in her beauty or her title, but in her humanity. Diana connected with people in ways few royals ever dared to. She refused to be a figurehead locked behind palace gates. Instead, she stepped into the world's pain and offered empathy. She hugged AIDS patients at a time when fear and stigma isolated them. She walked through minefields not as a stunt, but to shine light on forgotten dangers. She spoke with an honesty that shocked the establishment, but comforted ordinary people. These acts etched her forever into global memory, not as a queen who never was, but as a people's princess who always would be. Now, by naming the initiative after her, William and Catherine were tying Diana's spirit directly to the monarchy's present and its future. It wasn't just charity work anymore. It was legacy work. Within hours of the announcement, social media platforms lit up. Old footage of Diana resurfaced, her warm embrace of sick children, her effortless laugh, her tender smile that seemed to reach beyond the camera lens. To millions across the world, it felt as if Diana herself had returned, not in body, but through her son and his wife, finally reclaiming the place history had denied her within the royal institution. But inside palace walls, the reaction was far more complicated. What looked like a heartfelt tribute to the public appeared to others as a bold, even rebellious act. To King Charles, the Diana Initiative stirred ghosts he had tried to keep buried. It reminded him of painful chapters, the collapse of his marriage, the scandals that followed, and the enduring shadow of a woman whose presence seemed to define his reign, even in her absence. For him, this initiative was not just about charity. It was a reopening of wounds that had never truly healed. For Queen Camila, the announcement cut even deeper. After decades of carefully reconstructing her image, building trust with a skeptical public, and slowly finding her footing beside the king, Diana's name once again loomed large, overshadowing everything. To many, Diana remained the true Queen of Hearts, and now her memory was being revived at the very center of royal life. Camilla's careful efforts risked being undone in an instant. Her absence from recent public events, once dismissed as coincidence or health-related, began to take on new meaning. Insiders whispered that she had distanced herself intentionally, reluctant to endorse a project that could dilute the monarchy's message and reduce her role in the story of the crown. Yet, with Charles weakened, her voice was fading. William and Catherine, it seemed, were no longer waiting for permission. They were stepping forward with confidence, staking a claim not only to the future of the monarchy, but also to its soul. The Diana Initiative was more than a program. It was a statement to the world. It was Diana's legacy reborn. To the palace, it was a quiet revolution. Was Prince William's initiative welcomed with open arms? Was there any silent or open criticism towards the initiative? Let's dive into the details of rivals that silently opposed the initiative. The silent rivalries and subtle power shifts. To the outside world, Everything looked calm and orderly. The monarchy moved along with its usual rhythm. Ribbon cuttings, charity galas, handshakes with dignitaries, and carefully staged photographs designed to project unity and strength. To the casual observer, nothing seemed unusual. Yet, behind those glittering public moments, a different story was quietly unfolding. Beneath the polished surface of tradition and ceremony, a subtle but unmistakable shift in power had begun. It was the journalists who picked up the scent first. Reporters who closely monitored the royal calendar noticed that the heartbeat of the monarchy was changing. Kensington Palace, home to Prince William and Princess Catherine, was suddenly generating more headlines, more attention, and more excitement than Clarence House, the seat of King Charles and Queen Camilla. In press briefings, in feature stories, and even in gossip columns, the focus tilted toward William and Catherine. Advisors who once served Charles with absolute loyalty were now redirecting their energies. They began drafting strategies that placed William at the center of attention, not his father. Even palace meetings, once revolving around the king's presence, gradually took on a new tone, shaped around the heir instead. Prince William, long regarded as cautious and somewhat reserved, seemed to transform almost overnight. The hesitation that once defined his public persona gave way to a quiet but undeniable confidence. His speeches began to resonate with sharper conviction. His voice carried weight. His movements, once careful and understated, now revealed purpose and intent. He no longer looked like a man simply waiting for the crown to be handed to him. He looked like someone already carrying its weight on his shoulders. And at every step stood Catherine, the Princess of Wales. She was not just a supporting figure. She was the anchor of William's growing influence, where Camilla's appearances sometimes felt scripted and calculated. Catherine's presence radiated ease and sincerity. Each hospital visit, each school engagement, each warm exchange with ordinary people showcased her natural gift for connection. Her authenticity made her the monarchy's most dependable face. Poll after poll confirmed what the public already felt. Her popularity was soaring. She wasn't merely admired. She was trusted, and in that trust, she surpassed Camilla, sometimes even rivaling Charles himself. The tension, unspoken for months, finally revealed itself in a subtle but telling moment. At a charity luncheon, Camilla was asked about the Diana Initiative, a project honoring the late Princess of Wales. With a polite smile, she replied, "The monarchy has always served with dedication. We don't need to invoke the past to prove it." It was a measured response, carefully phrased, but to the world, it carried another meaning. The press read between the lines. Many interpreted it as a veiled dismissal of Diana's legacy, and by extension of Catherine, who had taken up Diana's memory as part of her mission. Within hours, the headlines blazed with speculation. Social media exploded, framing it as a clash between two women, Camilla embodying the old guard and Catherine symbolizing renewal. Catherine did not answer immediately. She waited. Days later, at a modest event dedicated to the initiative, she spoke with calm authority. Looking out at the audience, she said, "This work isn't about the past. It's about the future we build together." The statement was simple, but its weight was unmistakable. She wasn't just protecting Diana's memory. She was carrying it forward, weaving it into the monarchy's next chapter. And once again, the public leaned toward her. She had managed to turn a potential rivalry into a declaration of vision, one that people found both inspiring and hopeful. Inside the palace, whispers grew louder. Staff who had once carefully avoided comparisons now admitted what was obvious. Influence was shifting. Slowly, steadily. Power was moving away from Charles and Camilla toward William and Catherine. It wasn't a rebellion, nor a demand for abdication. It was something quieter, more deliberate. A rebalancing. One carefully chosen word, one thoughtful gesture, one strategic absence at a time. The monarchy had not yet officially changed hands, but in the minds of many press, public, and even palace insiders, the future was already here. And its names were William and Catherine. Did the opposition just wither away naturally with time? Did it snowball into another opening of old wounds? Let's dig into the details of the fresh rifts that followed the announcement of the initiative. Old wounds, new conflicts, rivalries within the royal household are rarely simple, and this one was no exception. Just when it seemed the tension had settled, another powerful figure entered the frame, Princess Anne. Anne has long been respected for her unshakable loyalty, her direct and sometimes cutting honesty, and her relentless devotion to duty. Unlike others, she has little interest in the drama and whispers that often swirl through palace corridors. Yet, even someone as disciplined as Anne could not hide her irritation forever. Behind the polished appearances, insiders say she had grown openly frustrated with Camilla. What made their rift remarkable was not just its sharpness, but its history. It was a tension rooted in decades of tangled relationships. To trace the beginnings, one must look back to the early 1970s. At that time, Anne was closely connected with Andrew Parker Bowles, the dashing cavalry officer who later married Camilla. Though their bond eventually cooled, the connection was significant enough to leave its mark. When Camilla then became entangled with Charles, the future king, the situation grew even more complicated. What might have remained a private discomfort slowly blossomed into a lifelong wedge between the two women. By the 1980s, the scandal of the love triangle Charles, Camilla, and Diana was no longer just gossip. It became an open wound for the royal family. The humiliation Diana suffered was felt by the entire nation, and Anne, who admired Diana's strength, never forgot the pain. She found it difficult, perhaps impossible, to forgive Camilla for her part in it. For Anne, it was not only about personal loyalty, but about the dignity of the monarchy itself. When Charles finally married Camilla in 2005, some believed the passage of time would smooth old wounds. Yet, Anne's demeanor told another story. She remained civil, but her warmth was absent. She was courteous in public, but noticeably cool. Her tone and actions, often carrying subtle signals that Camilla would never be a true queen in her eyes. Those close to Anne claimed she saw Camilla as a permanent outsider, accepted by necessity, but never embraced. Recent events have only brought this tension back into sharper view. When Camilla received recognition for her literacy work at the University of London, many noted a small but telling moment as the two women prepared to leave. Anne allowed Camilla to walk ahead. To the casual observer, it looked like a gesture of respect, the natural order of precedence. But those who knew their story interpreted it differently, not as deference, but as silent defiance. A refusal to genuinely acknowledge Camilla's rank. In Anne's world, courtesy could be a weapon as much as kindness. Not long after, Camilla announced her withdrawal from a major royal event, citing illness. On the surface, it seemed routine. Royal engagements are demanding, and health must come first. Yet, the timing stirred questions in the press and behind palace doors. Was Camilla genuinely unwell, or was she stepping back deliberately? Some speculated she was tired of fighting for her place at the center of the monarchy. Others wondered whether she was being quietly pushed aside. The line between personal choice and palace strategy blurred, and whispers only grew louder. Meanwhile, Anne pressed on as she always had. Her schedule remained packed, her presence steady, where Camilla appeared fragile. Anne seemed immovable. The contrast between the two women became almost symbolic. Camilla, fading at times into the background, seemed to represent the monarchy's struggles, its cracks, its controversies, its moments of weakness, and by contrast, Anne embodied resilience, discipline, and a quiet strength that reassured the public. To many observers, this dynamic painted a striking picture of the monarchy's future. On one side stood Camilla, weighed down by the past and battling for legitimacy. On the other stood Anne, firm and unwavering, carrying the duties of the crown with a seriousness that never faltered. And behind them both rose the younger generation, William, Catherine, and their children, ready to claim their place in a changing world. In the end, the story of Anne and Camilla is not just about two women in conflict. It is about what they represent, the clash of old wounds and present responsibilities, the struggle between fading shadows and enduring duty, and the unspoken question of what kind of monarchy will emerge from these rivalries. What are the implications of the announcements on the monarchy? Will the opposition successfully redefine the initiative? Will the crown be able to bear the weight of the drama that might play out in the coming years? Let's find out. Shadows behind the crown. For over a millennium, the British monarchy has survived wars, scandals, abdications, and revolutions. But today, its greatest challenge lies within. King Charles, after 70 years of waiting, finally wears the crown. Yet, his reign already risks being overshadowed by the legacy of Queen Elizabeth II and the undying memory of Diana, the people's princess. Instead of being a monarch of reform, Charles may be seen as one presiding over transition while others quietly prepare for the future. Queen Camilla faces her own battle. Once scorned, she has fought to secure her place. But the ghost of Diana and the rising popularity of Catherine, Princess of Wales, cast long shadows. Though crowned, Camilla fears irrelevance, her role at risk of being eclipsed not by scandal, but by the force of history and public sentiment. The monarchy endures, but power is shifting within its own walls. William and Catherine carry the heaviest burden of all. To them belongs the future of the monarchy. The public looks to them as symbols of modernity, as the pair who can breathe life into an ancient crown without breaking it. Yet this expectation is a dangerous weight. They must modernize but never appear rebellious, lead but never look as though they are snatching the throne from Charles's hands. They must carry the monarchy forward while forever honoring the past. A past haunted by Diana, whose image lingers as both inspiration and unrelenting comparison. Then there is Princess Anne, ever watchful, ever steady. She does not compete for the spotlight, yet her quiet strength makes her presence unavoidable. In her, people see the loyalty and stability that the monarchy so desperately needs. Even as its other members wrestle with rivalry and rumor, all these figures, Charles, Camilla, William, Catherine, Anne, and even the lingering spirit of Diana form the threads of a tapestry that is slowly being rewoven. The crown is not crumbling, but it is shifting. Power is moving in ways that cannot always be spoken aloud, and so the world watches, asking questions that no royal press release will ever answer. Is William being prepared to take the throne sooner than anyone admits? Is Camilla's step back from the spotlight temporary, or the beginning of her quiet eclipse? Has Charles already become more figurehead than king? And most haunting of all, has Diana, in death, returned to shape history once more? Her memory forcing its way into the palace halls, the monarchy thrives on silence. Its greatest power has always been found not in proclamations but in whispers, in absence, in glances exchanged during carefully staged ceremonies. Yet silence cannot mask reality forever. Something is shifting behind the polished smiles and glittering crowns. Change is happening in plain sight. The monarchy is not falling. It is being reshaped deliberately, strategically, and quietly. And as the world leans closer to witness this transformation, one truth becomes clear. The monarchy's deepest secrets are not written in official speeches or carved in stone monuments. They live in rivalry, in memory, and in silence that speaks louder than words. The crown will endure as it always has. But the most pressing question now is not whether it will survive. It is whose head it will rest upon tomorrow. One morning, inside the management offices of the royal estates, staff members opened the familiar contract register, where the same names had appeared for many years and almost never changed. But this time, one detail made several people pause for a few seconds. One name had disappeared: Annabel Elliot. The woman who had worked with the royal estates for more than 20 years, and who is also the sister of Queen Camilla, suddenly no longer appeared on the list of contracts. There was no press release. There was no official explanation. There was simply a quiet disappearance. According to several sources familiar with the operations of the Duchy of Cornwall, this change occurred during a review of business contracts after Prince William took over management of the estate. The Duchy of Cornwall is one of the most important financial resources of the heir to the throne. For that reason, every decision involving outside contracts is seen as a signal of how the Prince of Wales intends to shape his own system of power and finance. For many years, Annabel Elliot was considered a familiar figure in the network that provided interior design services for properties belonging to the duchy. She is a respected designer within the British upper class and has taken part in numerous decoration projects at historic estates. However, the fact that she is also the sister of Queen Camilla has always led observers to question the boundary between family relationships and business interests inside the royal system. As William and Catherine increasingly show their intention to build a more modern and transparent image for the monarchy, relationships of this kind have begun to face renewed scrutiny. Some analysts believe the decision to end the contract with Annabel Elliot is simply a step meant to separate personal interests from the financial operations of the estate. Yet behind the scenes of the royal world, many people see another layer of meaning. Power is quietly shifting, and that shift appears to be moving toward greater concentration around William and Catherine. So, is this an inevitable step in the modernization of the monarchy? Or a personal message that William wants to send to those who once stood close to the old center of power? If you support the decisiveness of William, comment with the number 1. If you feel sympathy for the declining position of Camilla, leave the number 2. To understand why Prince William is able to make such strong decisions regarding contracts and personnel within the royal business network, it is necessary to turn the clock back to a moment that completely changed the structure of power in the United Kingdom. That moment was September 8, 2022. When Queen Elizabeth II died at Balmoral Castle after more than 70 years on the throne. This event immediately triggered a chain of power transitions that the public rarely noticed in full. Charles became king. Camilla became queen. Yet, while public attention focused on the coronation and the ceremonies of the state, another important transformation occurred almost at the same time. Prince William officially became the Duke of Cornwall and took control of the entire Duchy of Cornwall, one of the most powerful economic assets of the British royal family. According to public financial records, the Duchy of Cornwall is valued at approximately $1.2 billion United States dollars. It is not simply a symbolic estate, but a genuine empire of land and agriculture. The duchy owns more than 135,000 acres of land spread across several regions of England, including farms, forests, commercial properties, historic villages, and modern housing developments. What makes the Duchy of Cornwall unique is not only its scale, but also its legal structure. The estate was established in the 14th century to provide an independent source of income for the heir to the throne. This means that all profits from the duchy do not belong to the national budget and are not under the direct control of the monarch. The primary manager and beneficiary is the Prince of Wales. Recent financial reports show that the Duchy of Cornwall generated annual revenue of about $30 million United States dollars in the year 2025. This income comes from several sources: agricultural land leases, real estate development, commercial and tourism projects. This stable stream of money has led many analysts to describe the duchy as a private golden reserve for the heir to the throne. Before becoming king, Charles controlled the Duchy of Cornwall for several decades and used this income to finance the operations of the Prince of Wales' office, while also supporting part of the expenses of other family members. But when Charles ascended the throne, the entire financial system immediately passed into the hands of William. This was not merely a ceremonial transition. It meant that William moved from being a senior royal figure to becoming the direct manager of a vast economic asset. Some observers believe this moment marked the true maturation of William's power within the royal system. For many years, he had often been viewed as a symbolic representative of the younger generation and the future of the monarchy. But with the Duchy of Cornwall in his hands, his role changed dramatically. William does not only represent the image of the monarchy, he also controls one of the most important financial centers of the House of Windsor. It is from this economic foundation of power that recent decisions have begun to emerge. When an individual or a company wants to work with estates belonging to the Duchy of Cornwall, they must pass through a management system overseen by William. That includes reviewing old contracts, long-standing partners, and business relationships that have existed for many years. For that reason, when the name of Annabel Elliot suddenly disappeared from contracts connected to the duchy, many observers did not treat it as an isolated event. They saw it as a signal that William has begun using his new financial authority to reshape the entire network surrounding the duchy. And when those changes begin to affect figures connected to the family of Camila, the story immediately becomes far more sensitive. Money always comes with control. In the case of the Duchy of Cornwall, that control is not limited to land management or financial budgets, but also appears clearly in decisions about personnel and business contracts. At this point, many observers believe Prince William has started to introduce the first changes since taking over the duchy. Changes that some people describe as a process of cleaning up the financial legacy left behind from the era of King Charles. Among the names attracting the greatest attention, Annabel Elliot quickly became the central focus. She is not only a well-known interior designer within the British upper class, but also the biological sister of Queen Camilla. For many years, this family connection meant that her role within the Duchy of Cornwall was always viewed with particular interest by the press and by royal observers. Financial records show that Annabel Elliot began participating in interior design projects for the Duchy of Cornwall around the year 2005. Her work involved decorating and renovating many properties belonging to the duchy, from farmhouses to historic residences that were rented out or used for official hospitality. According to reports published over many years, the fees she received ranged from about £19,000 to £82,000 each year, depending on the scale of the project. For many people inside royal circles, inviting a familiar designer to participate in repeated projects is not unusual. Historic estates often prefer to work with specialists who already understand architectural characteristics and conservation procedures. However, in the case of Annabel Elliot, the family connection always made the story more sensitive. During the years when Charles was still Prince of Wales, the network of business partners connected to the Duchy of Cornwall was largely built on long-standing relationships. Many of those partners were close friends, advisors, or individuals with direct connections to the family. This system functioned relatively smoothly for several decades, yet it was also frequently criticized for lacking a clear separation between personal relationships and business activity. When William took control of the Duchy of Cornwall in the year 2022, one of his first steps was to review all existing contracts. This is a common process when a new leader takes over a large organization. However, within the context of growing public pressure on the British monarchy to demonstrate financial transparency, the review quickly attracted the attention of the media. Within a short time after the evaluation process began, The name Annabel Elliot no longer appeared on the list of service providers for the Duchy of Cornwall. There was no official statement explaining the decision. Yet, for many royal analysts, the change carried a clear meaning. William had chosen to end a business relationship that had lasted nearly 2 decades. This change did not occur in isolation. At the same time that several old contracts were ending, the Duchy of Cornwall also began working with new partners. Some sources report that several interior projects and property development plans were later assigned to designers and contractors who have closer ties to the social circle of William and Catherine. Among them are close family friends and even godparents of their children. For supporters of William, this step appears entirely reasonable. They argue that any leader who takes over a major organization will naturally want to work with associates whom he trusts. Moreover, changing business partners is also viewed as a way to introduce new ideas into the management and development of the estates. However, for observers who closely follow royal affairs, the change carries another layer of meaning. Annabel Elliot is not only a designer, she also represents the presence of Camilla's family within the financial network that once revolved around the Duchy of Cornwall. When her name disappeared from the list of contracts, many people interpreted it as a signal that the influence of this branch of the family within the duchy properties may be coming to an end. Some commentators have even described the decision as a symbolic message. For many years, the stories surrounding the relationship between Charles, Camilla, and Princess Diana has left a deep mark in public memory. William, as the eldest son of Diana, is often viewed as the person who carries the emotional legacy of that turbulent period. For that reason, when he began restructuring the business network of the Duchy of Cornwall, every change involving people close to Camilla was quickly examined through both political and personal lenses. William has never publicly connected his management decisions with stories from the past. Yet the timing of these developments has still led many observers to raise questions. Is this simply a normal reform aimed at modernizing the management system of the duchy? Or is it a sign that the next generation of the royal family is gradually drawing a clear boundary with older networks of influence? What is certain is that the Duchy of Cornwall is now entering a new phase under the leadership of William. Contracts are being reviewed, partners are changing, and during that process, names once connected to the old system may gradually leave the stage. The case of Annabel Elliot therefore becomes the clearest example of this transition. There was no official announcement. There was no public controversy. There was simply a name disappearing from the list of contracts after nearly 20 years. Yet, inside the discreet world of the British monarchy, quiet changes like this often speak the loudest. But the Duchy of Cornwall is only the beginning of the story about financial power within the royal family. For many observers, the real concern for Queen Camilla does not lie in business contracts in Cornwall, but in 2 locations with far deeper symbolic meaning. Those places are Sandringham and Balmoral, 2 estates she has known for many years, yet which, in reality, do not belong to her. To understand why this matters, it is first necessary to distinguish the structure of royal property in Britain. Much of the public assumes that all palaces and castles belong to the king. In reality, the property system of the British monarchy is far more complex. Some estates belong to the Crown Estate, which is public property managed on behalf of the nation. These properties are not the personal possessions of the monarch and cannot be sold or passed to heirs according to personal wishes. Sandringham and Balmoral belong to a completely different category. They are private properties of the royal family, passed down through generations, just like inherited estates in aristocratic families. This means that ultimate control over these 2 estates lies with the head of the House of Windsor and is then transferred directly to the next successor. Sandringham is located in the county of Norfolk and has long been known as the place where the royal family gathers for their traditional Christmas holidays. It is also closely connected to many private moments of the Windsor family throughout the 20th century. Balmoral, located in the Scottish Highlands, carries an even deeper personal meaning. The vast estate was where Queen Elizabeth II spent much of her time resting, and it is also the place where she died in the year 2022. According to land records, Balmoral covers about 53,680 acres of land. It is one of the largest private estates owned by the British royal family. In addition to the main castle, the property includes forests, rivers, farms, and several smaller houses used for staff and guests. The exact financial value of the estate is difficult to determine. Yet many property experts believe it belongs among the most valuable private assets of the House of Windsor. When Queen Elizabeth II died, both Sandringham and Balmoral were transferred to King Charles as part of his personal inheritance. This means Charles became the direct owner of both estates, completely separate from public properties such as Buckingham Palace or Windsor Castle. However, this inheritance structure also leads to another reality. When Charles dies in the future, ownership of Sandringham and Balmoral will pass to the next monarch. In that scenario, the absolute owner of the entire estate of more than 53,000 acres at Balmoral will be Prince William. For many people within royal circles, this detail carries significant meaning for the future position of Queen Camilla in the years ahead. As the wife of the monarch, she currently has the right to access and use these estates just like other senior members of the family. But when Charles is no longer there, her legal position will change considerably. In the history of the British monarchy, widows of kings are usually provided with their own residence and continue to hold a certain role in royal life. However, access to the personal properties of the successor is not always guaranteed automatically. Everything depends on the decision of the new monarch and on internal agreements within the family. This leads to a rather sensitive reality. In the future, William will hold direct control over Sandringham and Balmoral. That control includes not only ownership of the land, but also the authority to decide who can use the properties inside the estates. At what time? And for what purpose? For Camilla, this means that the privileged access she currently enjoys may change. While Charles remains on the throne, her presence at Sandringham or Balmoral is completely natural. But when the structure of power shifts, every decision concerning the use of those estates will be in William's hands. Royal observers believe this is precisely why small changes within the management networks and personnel connected to the estates are becoming more noticeable. When someone like Annabel Elliot, the sister of Camilla, no longer appears in contracts connected to the Duchy of Cornwall, many people begin to ask whether that reduction of influence could eventually extend to other estates in the future. Some sources close to royal social circles even suggest that William and Catherine are gradually building their own management system for the assets they will control for many decades ahead. If that is true, then the personnel decisions being made today may only be the first steps in a much larger restructuring process. Within that context, the position of Camilla becomes rather unique. She remains queen while Charles is alive and continues to play an important role in official activities. But in the long term, her future will be closely connected to the decisions of the next generation. This does not mean Camilla will be removed from royal life, but it does show that real power is slowly shifting. As time passes, and the private assets of the House of Windsor gradually move into the hands of William, he will become the person holding the key that determines who can continue to consider places like Sandringham and Balmoral as home. And in the royal world, control of a home is sometimes the clearest symbol of power. Many people who follow the recent developments inside the British royal family have begun asking an important question. Why does Prince William appear so firm in restructuring financial and personnel networks that have existed for many decades? Why were long-standing contracts ended relatively quickly after he took control of the Duchy of Cornwall? For many analysts, the answer does not lie only in governance or financial transparency. It also lies in memories that shaped an entire generation of the House of Windsor. Memories that began nearly 30 years ago, when the marriage between Prince Charles and Princess Diana collapsed in public before the entire world. In the early 1990s, Reports about the extramarital relationship between Charles and Camilla gradually became a major subject in the British press. Leaked telephone recordings, investigative newspaper reports, and television interviews turned the family crisis into one of the largest scandals in the modern history of the monarchy. For the public, it was a controversial romantic story. But for two young boys inside the Windsor family at that time, Prince William and Prince Harry, it was a deeply turbulent period in their own lives. William was only 15 years old then, old enough to understand what was happening, but still far too young to escape the emotional impact of a family crisis. Royal biographers say William witnessed many tense moments as his parents gradually separated. Princess Diana frequently became the focus of the media during that time, receiving enormous sympathy from the public while also facing intense pressure from disputes within the royal household. Images of Diana appearing across the international press during those years left a deep mark on the memory of an entire generation of British people, including her own sons. After Diana died in the year 1997, public emotion toward her became even stronger. Many people viewed her as a symbol of vulnerability within a royal system, often seen as too rigid. For many years afterward, Diana's name remained closely linked to the story of the relationship between Charles and Camilla. Within that context, William grew up carrying a very particular emotional legacy. He was both the future heir of the monarchy and the son of the woman the public often viewed as the victim in one of the most famous family crises of the 20th century. However, those who followed William's development noticed that he rarely showed any open confrontation regarding the past. When Charles and Camilla officially married in the year 2005, both William and Harry attended the ceremony. Their presence at that time was widely interpreted as a signal that the family was trying to close a deeply controversial chapter. In the years that followed, William also maintained a very cautious tone in his public statements. He focused on charitable work, building the image of a new generation of the monarchy, and avoided participating in debates about the past relationship of his father. This approach gradually helped him become one of the most trusted members of the British royal family in the eyes of the public. However, silence does not mean memory disappears. Some commentators believe that when William began to hold real financial authority through the Duchy of Cornwall, he chose a very different method to express his position. Instead of creating direct confrontation, he focused on restructuring the economic system surrounding the heir to the throne. For many decades under Charles, the Duchy of Cornwall was not only a financial resource but also the center of a network of partners, advisors, and close associates. Some individuals within that network had social or family connections with Camilla. This was not necessarily unusual within the British aristocracy, where personal relationships often play an important role in business. But when William took over the duchy, he appeared determined to establish a clearer boundary. Contracts were reviewed. Some long-standing partners no longer continued working with the duchy. Others were replaced by new specialists or associates from the social circle of William and Catherine. In the view of many analysts, this is a very skillful strategy. William does not need to publicly criticize anyone. He also does not create any direct confrontation within the family. Yet, by controlling the financial resources of the heir to the throne, he can reshape the entire economic ecosystem surrounding that position. For those who once benefited from the old network, the change means their influence gradually declines over time. For William, it is a way to confirm that the financial resources of the Duchy of Cornwall will serve the vision of the next generation, rather than continue supporting relationship structures formed in the past. Some commentators describe this approach as strategic independence. William does not disrupt the stability of the monarchy through personal conflict. Instead, he builds a new system in which financial power is more tightly controlled and less dependent on family connections. Within that context, decisions such as ending the contract with Annabel Elliot are interpreted in different ways. For some observers, it is simply administrative reform. For others, it carries symbolic meaning. An era in which the Duchy of Cornwall operated through familiar networks is gradually coming to an end. In its place emerges a new structure where Prince William appears, determined to show that the financial resources of the heir to the throne will no longer be used to sustain any family ecosystem beyond his own vision. In many analyses of the shifting balance of power within the British royal family, attention often focuses on Prince William. Yet, a closer look at how decisions are forming around the Duchy of Cornwall and the private assets of the House of Windsor reveals another figure who is gradually emerging with significant influence. That figure is Princess Catherine. In the careful yet unmistakable generational transition now unfolding, Catherine is not simply standing beside William during public ceremonies. Several sources familiar with the work of the Prince of Wales report that she is becoming increasingly involved in strategic discussions concerning asset management, charitable initiatives, and the long-term image of the monarchy. This development becomes particularly notable when examining how the Duchy of Cornwall is being operated after William assumed control. The duchy is not only the most important financial source for the heir to the throne, it is also the foundation supporting the entire operation of the Prince and Princess of Wales for many decades ahead. Every decision involving investment, property development, or business partnership has a direct impact on how the next generation of the monarchy will function. According to royal observers, Catherine has become an inseparable part of this decision-making process. Over many years, she has built the image of a careful and discreet member of the royal family, someone who focuses strongly on long-term issues such as public health, early childhood education, and social development. This strategic approach leads many observers to believe that Catherine is not only providing support, but also acting as a true partner in shaping William's direction. Some commentators suggest that the couple is building a new leadership model for the British monarchy. Instead of relying on traditional social networks, they tend to choose advisors and collaborators based on professional expertise and personal trust. This approach helps create a management structure that is more flexible and less influenced by complicated family connections. The growing role of Catherine can also be seen in another symbolic sphere of royal life. That sphere is royal jewelry. Within the traditional system of the House of Windsor, many valuable pieces of jewelry are considered symbols of power and continuity within the monarchy. They are often passed down to future queens or loaned for important official occasions. One of the most famous pieces in this category is the tiara known as Girls of Great Britain and Ireland. It is one of the most iconic crowns of the British royal family and was worn by Queen Elizabeth II during many important occasions. After her death, the tiara has continued to appear on the head of Queen Camila during several official events. However, within royal tradition, many experts believe that symbolic jewels of this kind will eventually pass to the next generation of queens. This means that in the future, when William becomes king, Catherine will most likely become the true heir to these powerful symbols. For that reason, the use of certain royal jewels by Camilla today is often viewed as temporary during a transitional period. Royal historians note that in the past, famous tiaras often moved from one generation to another, depending on the position of the head of the monarchy. This symbolic transfer is one reason why Catherine's role is receiving increasing attention. She is not only the wife of the heir to the throne, she is also widely seen as the future Queen of Britain, the woman who will inherit both the material legacy and the symbolic heritage of the Windsor dynasty. Within that context, the changes taking place inside the financial and management system of the Duchy of Cornwall can also be viewed from a long-term perspective. William and Catherine appear to be building a new foundation for the reign they will lead in the future. Some commentators observe that the couple tends to establish a more streamlined structure of power. Old networks of influence are gradually being replaced by a new system of collaborators. Within that system, individuals with direct connections to William and Catherine occupy central roles, while relationships once associated with previous generations may gradually lose influence. This does not mean that other members of the royal family will be removed from shared royal life, but it does reveal a clear reality. As the new generation prepares to rise to the highest position of the monarchy, they also seek to build a foundation of power that reflects their own vision and priorities. In that broader picture, Catherine is no longer seen merely as a symbol of elegance or stability. She is gradually becoming an important part of the emerging power structure within the British royal family. Together with William, she represents a future reign that many observers believe will place greater emphasis on transparency, financial discipline, and stricter oversight of the networks of influence surrounding the throne. If current trends continue, Catherine's role within that system may become even clearer as time passes. As William moves closer to the throne, the person standing beside him will not simply be a royal wife. She will be the future queen, a partner who will help shape how the British monarchy operates in the 21st century. After all the figures worth billions of dollars, the quiet personnel decisions, and the debates surrounding historic estates, the most important question still remains: what direction will the future of the British monarchy take? What is unfolding inside the royal property system is not merely a story about real estate or business contracts. It is also a sign that a generational transition is taking place step by step, moving from an older model of power toward a new way of operating. For many decades under the leadership of Prince Charles in earlier years, the network surrounding the Duchy of Cornwall and many royal activities was built upon long-standing personal relationships. This model is quite familiar within the British aristocracy, where trust and personal loyalty often play a central role in decisions about cooperation. However, when William assumed control of the Duchy of Cornwall, many observers noticed that his approach appeared somewhat different. Instead of maintaining the entire existing system, he began reviewing contracts, partners, and even relationships that had existed for many years. These changes surprised a number of people, particularly because they touched individuals who had close connections with members of Queen Camilla's family. Yet for many analysts, this was not a personal move. They believe William is attempting to shape a new model of governance for the assets belonging to the heir to the throne, one in which transparency and efficiency are placed at the forefront. Another detail that has recently attracted considerable attention is Camilla's decision regarding her private residence, Ray Mill House. This property has long been considered the most important personal residence she maintains outside the royal palaces. Her reported consideration of selling or restructuring the ownership of this home has led some observers to wonder whether she may be preparing for changes in the future. In a context where control of major estates such as Sandringham and Balmoral will ultimately pass to William, the long-term living arrangements of other members of the royal family have also become a subject of increasing discussion. All of these factors point to a fairly clear reality. The British royal family is entering a period of transition. The generation represented by Charles reflects a more traditional model in which personal and family networks hold a central role. By contrast, the generation of William and Catherine appears to be moving toward a more streamlined system, where decisions are evaluated more strongly on the basis of efficiency and accountability. As British society increasingly demands transparency from public institutions, the monarchy must also adapt in order to maintain public support. This requires not only financial reforms, but also a new approach to power and responsibility. Many commentators believe that William understands this clearly and is attempting to lay the groundwork for his future reign through cautious yet visible changes. In the end, the story of ending a contract or reshaping a network of partners may appear to be only a small detail within a much larger picture. Yet those small details reveal how a new generation of leadership is beginning to reshape the system it will eventually inherit. Thank you for following this journey into the inner workings of power behind the British monarchy. If you are interested in the lesser-known stories about the figures who stand behind the throne, do not forget to subscribe so you will not miss the next analysis. And what do you think about William's decision to end the contract with the sister of Queen Camilla? Share your thoughts in the comments section. They were once the most scandalous, most controversial couple, but also the most enduring duo in the history of the modern British monarchy. Despite criticism, despite fierce public opposition, Charles and Camilla still held hands through nearly half a century of storms. Yet now, when the world thought nothing could tear them apart, a shocking announcement hit. Charles and Camilla have split. No one could believe their eyes when the first reports leaked from inside Buckingham Palace. A silent separation. No press release. No formal farewell. Just the increasingly empty corridors once graced by Camilla. And the growing absence of Charles from royal events. Something had shattered. And this time, it was beyond repair. Insiders say it began after the king underwent intense medical treatment and started re-evaluating what truly mattered in his remaining years. The persistent presence of Camilla, once his refuge, had become too large a shadow, one that many within the palace wanted removed to clear the path for a new reign under William and Catherine. This is not just the end of a notorious love story. It is a clarion call signaling a purge of covert power within the British monarchy, where even a queen without a throne can be discarded mercilessly. On a cold, rainy night in July 2025, as the streets around Buckingham Palace lay silent, a back gate suddenly swung open. No motorcade, no guards, just a black Range Rover silently gliding into the storm, leaving behind a spine-chilling emptiness. Inside the vehicle, a woman sat in the back seat, head bowed, hand trembling as it clutched a white lace handkerchief. It was Camilla, the Queen of the United Kingdom, the woman who deserted her throne with no word of farewell, no official statement, and no preceding sign. News exploded just hours later. Queen Camilla missing. Buckingham's night of shattered silence. And Charles left all alone were headlines that plastered the front pages from The Guardian to the Daily Mail. Night bulletins switched to emergency mode. And royal experts flooded television with theories. Some suggested Camilla is gravely ill. Others said she was forced to leave, or even that a palace coup was in motion. The public was swept up in a cyclone of chaotic information. Some were shocked, some curious, and some unexpectedly moved to sympathize with a woman once despised, now vanishing as if she had never existed. The final photo was snapped by a press photographer hiding behind shrubs by the palace south gate. Camilla, tear-streaked, her face aged and weary, clutched a handkerchief embroidered with a silver letter C. The image was shared millions of times within hours, appearing on magazines from the United States to France, Australia to the Arab world. The picture was instantly dubbed with a haunting title, The Final Queen Leaving Her Throne in Silence. Inside Buckingham Palace, the atmosphere was as dense as if an earthquake had just struck. Royal staff could not hide their bewilderment. An insider told The Times that in the days before the departure of Camilla, fierce arguments had erupted between her and Charles. Angry voices echoed down the cold stone corridors. Private doors slammed repeatedly, and no one dared approach. A veteran guard summarized it bluntly by saying that was their final battle. They were no longer husband and wife, but two opposing fronts. At Sandringham, where Charles often retreats for quiet, the king reportedly fell into a terrifying silence. He did not appear publicly for 48 hours after the incident. Royal engagements were cancelled en masse. The palace refused all interview requests and offered only a brief statement saying, "Queen Camilla is currently away from the palace and on private leave." The vague response did nothing to quell the storm. It only fueled suspicions that her disappearance was not voluntary. People began revisiting a long and controversial chapter in royal history. The journey of Camilla, from the homewrecker in the marriage of Charles and Diana to a woman condemned by the public for decades, before finally ascending as queen under the decree of Elizabeth II in 2022. It was a journey marked by tears, being branded a witch, official trips met with jeers, and tabloid covers tearing her image and reputation for nearly half a century. Camilla had endured it all, standing beside Charles during the times he was most criticized, step by step rebuilding their public image with a patience that bordered on resignation. So what made her give it all up? What made the woman who once said she lives to be with Charles quietly turn her back at the very moment he needed her most? Another source from within the palace revealed the conflict did not come from the outside, but from the two of them. The years following the cancer treatment of Charles changed him both psychologically and in his habits. He became withdrawn, irritable, and unpredictable. Camilla felt excluded from important decisions, pushed outside the circle of trust, now revolving around William and the new advisors. The source said she felt she was no longer part of the power and was just a shadow in the palace she once fought to enter. The situation became even more tragic as the media turned its attention to those once close to Camilla. An old friend from Wiltshire told the British Broadcasting Corporation that they think Camilla was simply exhausted, tired of comparisons, tired of being doubted, and tired of feeling lonely in what was supposed to be the crowning victory of her life. These words were nothing less than a veiled indictment of Charles, the man who had once vowed to protect Camilla for life, but let her walk away on a rainy night without a single goodbye. Meanwhile, social media erupted with fierce debate. Some criticized Camilla for running away like a coward, while others defended her as a victim of a palace full of schemes and coldness. Many expressed regret, even remorse, for having despised her for so many years. One account wrote that she is not Diana, but she is no monster either. She is an old woman and she needs love like anyone else. The biggest question remains unanswered. Is this just a temporary interruption?